to moderate this session on alternative forms of self-representation with 6 very distinguished guests who I'll introduce just in a moment. My name's Hazel Marsh. I'm an associate professor at UEA in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, and I'm one of the co-investigators on the Recovery with Dignity project, which has sought to better understand the experiences of recovery in post-disaster situations in India. As the very interesting presentations and discussions in sessions over the last 2.5 days have highlighted, in the initial rush to respond to disaster events, the rights, voices, and impacts on affected populations tend to be represented in ways that undermine rather than support their dignity, that is, represented by external actors. And longer-term responses to disaster events then have a tendency to view the recovery process through technocratic and managerial fixes, downplaying the more human-focused aspects, for example, psychosocial elements, and ignoring the individual and socially differentiated ways in which disaster and recovery are experienced. So in this session, we draw on examples and case studies, mainly from India and the Global South, where recovery interventions have gone beyond the immediate needs after a disaster to effectively support disaster-affected communities in self-driving recovery to shape their overall development trajectories. So I'm going to ask each of the speakers to draw on their expertise and offer examples from their own work as academics or practitioners of recovery interventions that have supported and recognized the dignity of disaster-affected communities in self-driving recovery. And of course, you can put questions to our speakers using the question and answer function, which we will hopefully have time to get to. So as I said, we have 6 very distinguished speakers. I'll just briefly introduce each one. Divya Chandrasekhar is Associate Professor in the Department of City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah, with expertise in community recovery from disasters. Her research has examined post-disaster community participation and capacity building, networking, and coordination among recovery institutions and disaster recovery policy in South and Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and the US. Divya specializes in qualitative inquiry and mixed method studies. She's a member of the Utah Seismic Safety Commission, the Utah State Hazard Mitigation Team, the Utah State Hazard Mitigation Plan Advisory Committee, and is an affiliate of the Global Change and Sustainability Center at the University of Utah. And she also leads the Utah Resilience Initiative event series at the University of Utah. We also have Bijo Thomas Karukappally. He is the station director at Radio Matuli, a community radio service situated in the Wayanad district of Kerala State. The community radio service focuses on different communities living within its transmission zone and is aimed at providing a platform for marginalized sections to express themselves socially, culturally, and spiritually. Maxmilla Martin is a geographer focusing on climate, extreme weather, and people's responses. He's a research fellow in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Sussex and visiting researcher at the Advanced Centre for Atmospheric Radar Research, Cochin. His current research explores the ways to co-produce marine weather forecasts with artisanal fishers and forecasters in southwestern India. Alexandre Woodall is an experienced museum professional and researcher with a particular interest in imaginative object-based learning. She's currently Programme Director for the Creative and Cultural Industries Management MSc Programme at the University of Sheffield. She's managed learning, interpretation, and exhibition programmes for organisations including Museums Sheffield, Manchester Art Gallery, Royal Armouries in Leeds, and the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts at the University of East Anglia. Her PhD is from the School of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester and explores sensory engagements with objects in art galleries. She's involved in object-centric museological research in India with the National Museum Institute in New Delhi and in Ladakh. She's a mentor and professional reviewer for the Museums Association, for whom she initiated the first study into bullying in museums in the UK. She's a co-founder of GlamCares, a network to support community engagement, practitioner wellbeing, and she also works as a museum consultant. Mary Vattamattam is chairperson at Timbuktu Collective, a registered not-for-profit organization initiated in 1990, working for sustainable development in the drought-prone Anantapur district of Andhra Pradesh, India. She's made pioneering contributions towards women's empowerment, child rights, alternative education and disability rights in Srikalukkam and Anantapur districts over the last 4 decades. She's promoted 4 women's thrift and credit cooperatives and their federation, which now has a membership of over 22,000. She set up the Nature School and has advanced the concept of ecological child rights in the region. As Director of Programs at Timbuktu, Mary provides overall guidance to all the programs of the collective. And last but not least, we have Shalini Sharma, an Associate Professor at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, Pune. Her research interests include environmental justice, political ecology, media studies, memory studies, and oral history. She's a trustee of the Remember Bhopal Museum and has been involved with the museum from its formative stage. So to start, Divya, you've recorded a fascinating and very insightful presentation for the project website, which I would urge everyone to listen to. It's really excellent, telling 3 stories of non-traditional pathways to representation and self-recovery in New Orleans, Puerto Rico, following Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and Tamil Nadu, following the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004. And I was particularly struck by something you say in that presentation about alternative forms of representation being not only normal to find and expected, but actually in some ways good and healthy. So can I start by asking you, why are alternative forms of representation normal? And in your experience, what can they achieve for communities? I'd be particularly interested in hearing a bit more about the transformation that took place in Tamil Nadu, which you refer to as discovery in your talk.
Thank you for having me at this panel. I had in my presentation talked about how recovery was a very complex process, that there being no standard pathway to recovery, which basically means that there should be no standard way of representation in recovery. That's just it's a myth, right? Our beautiful, wonderful, idealized process of recovery is that communities have a disaster, everyone gets together, makes a plan and recovers. And that's never how recovery has ever happened. So it's always a little baffling why we would conceive community processes to be equally simplified and uniform. So that's pretty normal to find that there is a lot of contestation, a lot of different ways of expressing yourself in recovery. Everybody has a very unique trajectory to recovery based on who they are, what their situation is, what the conditions of recovery are. Recovery itself is a very evolving, uncertain process. And so to find alternative ways of representing yourself is just perfectly normal. It's like saying, how many recovery plans are there? There are as many plans as there are people. And so to say that I would like to be represented in my own way is hardly a surprise. I say it's healthy because of that complexity, because there are so many things happening at the same time. You want multiple forms of representation. You want to be able to participate in, I'm a planner, so I'm going to talk about recovery planning. You want to be able to participate in recovery planning, say a relocation plan to a village, but you also want to be able to represent yourself in other platforms, maybe on the livelihood side or in other dimensions of recovery. And so it's a good thing to be able to have multiple platforms where you can engage in the recovery process through. And so I think planners and development practitioners should not be afraid of having people, have different platforms of it. In fact, it's your job to catch up with the different forms of self-expression. And so that was that. And you were asking about the case I spoke about in the video about discovery. As I said there, it's one of my favorite stories from India because having studied participation for so long, I realized you can't force transformation. And transformation within communities has to come from within communities. And so in this case, I spoke about a fishing village that was going through a relocation process after the 2004 tsunami and in Tamil Nadu. And they had a breakdown of a relationship between the NGO that was funding their relocation and the village panchayat. There were accusations of theft, and the NGO decided to leave midway through the project. They were halfway through collecting materials for it, and so they didn't have money anymore. And the women of the village had been at the same time working with a different group on livelihood training and were not prominent in the relocation process, the planning process. And they were able to bring this new group into the relocation, so to supplement the old nonprofit. And in that process, it was a discovery of their own capacity of being important to the relocation process, and of recognition. So they gained legitimacy as an important stakeholder. Both by themselves, it was a revelation to them that they could do it. And it was also a revelation to the larger community. And everybody had a very positive outlook of future involvement of these women in future development issues, not just relocation, but in generally in village matters which relate to the physical aspects of your environment. That was just something that I had not seen necessarily. There was a lot of discussion around gendered ways of recovery and the lack of women's involvement in relocation planning. But this was one of those moments where no NGO was coming and telling you have to involve women from your community in relocation planning. It was the village discovering for themselves the value of different stakeholders within its community.
And that kind of transformation is something that you referred to as discovery in your talk. And can you just mention the two other types of alternative platforms that you, from your own experience, that you've worked with in your own research in Puerto Rico and in the USA, which...
Well, there are many, and I only talked about three.
More, but just for 2 more minutes, if you could tell us a minute each.
Sure. They're big stories, so I have necessarily, this is a reductionist approach, I'm sorry. We can write a dissertation on each of these, right? The three forms I spoke about, apart from discovery, the two others were alliance, which is this act of banding together. And I see a lot of networking, within nonprofits, which are bigger. So INGOs, for example, very commonly network with each other. But to have small community-based organizations network with each other is a little rarer. It's common, but it's not as, maybe it's more common today. It's been 20 years since there was the tsunami. And Hurricane Katrina, which is what I based my case on. There's the case of the neighborhood partnership network after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Louisiana, over here in the US. And New Orleans had a pretty devastating hurricane, and Black community, extremely low income, heavily marginalized, history of racial marginalization. And what this nonprofit did, it became a network of small community-based organizations. So we're talking residents associations. And they banded together. They taught each other things that the other people did not know. For example, who's the city council? How do you actually go and talk to somebody in the city council? What's a development regulation, right? How do you write a grant? So they have been doing capacity building, sharing capacity building lessons and et cetera for a decade, more since then. And so their work started with recovery, informing recovery. And what that allowed them to do is be represented in larger forums. So as an individual civic association, you may not have had the power to go be heard in, say, the citywide plan, but as a consortium, they had better visibility. And in return, this sharing of resources allowed them to be more effective and to support each other's works. And so they also had more effect on recovery within their communities. These are community-based organizations. So that was alliance. And that's one way that I've found that people are increasing or have a pathway to increase their representation. And then the other one was insurgency. And Puerto Rico is really, all of Latin America is really great for this, where you just don't bother with the formal recovery process. You just step right outside it and you change the forum, right? In other work, I've called it representation through opposition. So if there's a decision forum in our heads, there's visibility in a forum and having the influence over the forum, right? Well, you don't have to be present in a forum to have impact on the forum. So you step outside the forum and you change the bounds of that forum. You force it to come towards you as opposed to you going towards them. And insurgency is a notion of radical planning. You step outside the norms And in Puerto Rico, in Caguas, Puerto Rico has historically had vacancy and abandonment problem for a lot of properties in this towns, just because of various tax laws have stayed abandoned. So Urbe Api in Caguas has basically been taking over. They've been squatting. They've taken over different buildings, and over time they have repurposed them into things the community needs. And they've been doing it especially since 2017 Maria. So there were 2 hurricanes in Puerto Rico in 17 within a week of each other. There was Irma and Maria, and they both. And so after that, they really upped their efforts to take over these buildings. So they have shelters for homeless youths. They have a shop. They have community gardens. They have an artists gallery. It started as an artists movement before the hurricanes, and so it's evolved into these other things. They even have a place for drug addicts to share needles or exchange needles in a safe way, which is one of the ways that drug intervention has been happening in the US at least.
Thank you so much.
That is insurgency.
Such striking, so we've got alliance, insurgency, and discovery, these 3 examples of multiple examples of alternative platforms, as you say. Thank you so much. We haven't got much time, so I'll move on to Bijo, and hopefully there'll be time to come back to pick up on any points. Bijo, could you tell us something about the community radio Matali and how the radio has supported disaster-affected communities in driving self-recovery?
Can I just make use of my PPT?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Is that?
It's okay. See, yeah, I think it's easy for you. This is a place where it's in the Western Ghats of Kerala. It's called Wayanad. And mostly the people of here are from the tribal background. 1800, 70,000 persons are there. And out of that, 18% of the total population of Wayanad district is tribal people. And they are from the most, maybe the tribal people like Paniya, Kuruma, Kurcha. It's just like they are mostly they are staying there nearby the forest villages, and 300 villages are there for these tribal people here. And we just started a radio station called Community Radio Matali. It's broadcast for 24 hours, and more than 80 programs are there. And we just do only the positive journalism from the very, very beginning. And we also broadcast both in Malayalam as well as tribal language. And this is the only community radio station or the only radio station here in Wayanad district that is working, especially with the tribal people. And this is the only radio station that broadcasts every day the programs in tribal language. Then we were facing 2 floods as well as this, as usual, pandemic too. And the flood, as you know, that this is in the Western Ghat. Western Ghat, and this has very mountain ups and downs. I'm not exactly whether you visualize about this place here. And we never thought about this flood here because it's in the mountain. But that happened in 2018 and 19. And the flood was a severe flood, and landslide was also there. A lot of people were died, and a lot of people lost their houses and livelihood and everything. And we were not in a position to think about such a flood situation like here. And in that particular situation, there was no time for the people to understand what happens and where the damage happens. In that particular situation, there was only one radio station here, and as well as the electricity was lost. Then all the district administration has to come over here to the radio station and to say the information through a radio station. And that's why we just thought about providing radio sets to each and every household here in tribal hamlets too. So as you know that radio is reliable, portable, small, economical, and at the same time, it's very, very widely used. And in that particular situation, announcements about the roads, transportation, life from affected areas, Then the facilities where we can go for mobile recharging, and also we made some mobile recharging facilities. Then the camps where people can just approach approach, and flood alerts and isolated areas. And we also started one helpline number for them to call us. And afterwards, we just started doing a lot of activities, like the support given by the support of collectors, sub-collector, and other district administration, because people became so panic. They're not exactly what to do and how to go and where to where to go, and they lost everything, and they were in the panic situation too. In that condition, we had to do a lot of activities, the immediate work as well as some kind of rectification work, and long-term work has to be done. So we, being a radio station and as a part of NGO, had to start with the support of other people. So we, being a radio station, gave this talks of psychiatrists, and then health programs, and the information, timely informations. And then we also provided some food kits, dress materials, and all other things to the people who are really in need of. And all the people, especially from the health sector, administrative sector, and other departments, and the NGO sector, we became a bridge between these people and the affected people. So we had to broadcast all the programs like this, because this is the only radio station. And at the same time, we had to go all these important messages that I am just showing it through the scene. I'm not exactly whether we will be getting time or not. Anyway, all the important messages with the support of Government of Kerala, as well as some other NGOs facilities. And these were the subjects we dealt with. Then now it comes on COVID, because people here in Wayanad district are nearby major town is 100 kilometers away from Wayanad. And here there is no medical college, and there is no airport, there is no train facility. And nearest better town is 100 kilometers away from here. 100 kilometers is not a problem, but it takes more than 3.5 hours from one side to the other side. We have to cross a Western Ghat, and the Ghat area also. Sometimes you maybe know about this place. In that particular situation, people do not know where to go and how to go with, and what the facilities that we will be able to get in particular in the case of COVID or some kind of this pandemic. So we just wanted to support them, health related as well as non-health related objectives to the people, such as food kits and mask to the tribal people. And we also started giving some support to the people who are in jail, because even those people were not in a position to go out. And we just supported them by giving some books to the jail, and supported them to get recognition from the National Library Council. Then the blood donation, and all the people not in a position to go to the hospital to provide bloods. So we saw some youth association and made that. And also we started providing TV sets to people who are children who are not in a position to go to the school, and radio sets to the tribal people. More than 1,000 radio sets were distributed to the people, and also vaccination camps. And we, our radio station is here. This is a building that you can see. We started COVID center for the people to, because people who are in their hamlets may not be able to stay there for a long time when they are already COVID positive. So that we brought them to our house, and more than 150 people were accommodated here in this particular time, especially from the tribal backgrounds. So we started a helpline number or tele-counseling, counseling support to the people who are isolated, and people who are already there in the in home or in the hospital, because they just became panic. So being a radio station, we started doing all these programs, and at the same time, we also developed some mobile applications, so that even if the people are not in a position to get the radio broadcasting directly, they will be able to get through the mobile with the application. So National Health Mission in Kerala state has already advised the people to download our application and to get the messages, timely messages from the NHM as well as from radio station. This is the activities that we did during this particular time, giving messages, magazine type, and then jingles, and sourcing youth volunteers, then the support distribution for livelihood maintenance kits, then ATM facilities for the people, because when the lockdown is being done, there may not be bank facilities, ATM facilities. In such a condition, we source the support of Government of Kerala and other departments to make some mobile ATM possibilities to the interior places so that the people can get something from them. Then we also,
Bijo,
I know that time is,
sorry, because we have other speakers. Sorry,
it's okay.
I wish we had more time, but I'm really sorry.
If there is any questions, we'll be just going.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll come back.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity that I just received, and we are working very, very better way for the tribal people here in Wayanad district. So
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's certainly things I'd like to ask you, but I'll leave it. I'll let all the other speakers speak first, and hopefully we'll come back to questions I have and anyone else. Maxmilla, I think I have you next. Could you tell us, please, about the co-production of marine weather forecasts in southwestern India and how this has supported self-driven recovery processes?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Is it okay if I show some of my slides?
Yes.
Sure. Sure. Thank you.
There we can see. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, my name is Max Martin. I work in the anthropology department of Sussex University, but actually I'm a geographer. And thanks for inviting me for this workshop. So I'm talking to you from my fieldwork site in southwestern coast of India, a beautiful place called Thiruvananthapuram. Here, an interdisciplinary team of my colleagues have been working since 2017. In November that year, when we were scoping for this study, we witnessed a major cyclone, a severe cyclone, a huge storm system that claimed 364 lives in this district and a nearby district, the southernmost district of India called Kanyakumari, or Cape Comorin, if you're familiar with the old name of the place. So the storm sort of foxed forecasters by gaining strength all of a sudden, and it went too close to the shore. So a lot of coastal fishermen who were out in the sea without any adequate forecast about the strengthening of the system were caught in that, and they've seen 2-story, 3-story high, that's about 10 or 20 meters high waves, and 364 people died in these two districts. So we started our research in 2018, just when people were recovering from this cyclone. We were looking at this kind of hazards they face and the risk perceptions of people and how forecasts could be more useful. As for background, the artisanal fishers of southwestern India live literally on the margins of the map in many senses of the word. They are at the edge, they are socioeconomically marginalized, they are considered to be outside or at the lower rungs of the still providing caste system. So it's a kind of a social hierarchy. Fishing costs are increasing and many fishers have high interest debt to repay because of the technologies they use, like outboard engines, GPS, fish finders, etc., etc. But then fishing is a very highly seasonal job and fish is perishable, and they don't own the market system. Market systems are owned by outsiders. So it's very precarious. So in effect, fishers end up fishing in all sorts of weather. If there is fish, fishers will go. Our research involved satellite and local observations. So we talked with fishers, we had ethnographic interventions, we had participant observation, we lived in villages. I live in a village called Pudiyathura at the southern edge of Thiruvananthapuram. And we also looked at the real-time weather forecast provided by agencies, and we work with Cochin University, a Science and Technology University, to give better forecast, in the sense that we take forecast from the forecast agencies and we kind of value add them, make them more localized, give graphics out of them, and disseminate it through online services. So that's our idea of co-production all about. So it's and the next step, we gather feedback from the fishers about how well they understand the forecast, how good the forecasts are, what more they would like to know. So what we learn is that fishers are very sophisticated users of forecasts. They seek out and find forecasts and local details, and they need a lot of details to be safe, but that they do not always get it. And the central character in the fisher story is always fish, not forecasters, not scientists, not the government. Fish determines the fisher's day-to-day story. Talking about this slide talks about, it's a kind of boats they use, about 30 feet high with twin outboard engines, and they go up to 200 kilometers, some of them. Otherwise, in smaller boats, they stick to about 10 or 20 kilometers from the shore. So they seek out information, and this multiple source forecast gathering has become very prevalent after the 2017 cyclone. Fishers are afraid of the sea now. They can't trust it anymore. That's the kind of narrative. So there is a kind of a added premium to forecast, and forecasts are almost always discussed among peers. So the scientific forecast from NOAA or apps like Windy get triangulated with traditional, indigenous, practical knowledge also. And as the next slide shows, the formal forecasts are usually for big 100 by 100 kilometer grid, which is relevant for this kind of small canoe fishers who go to 5 or 10 kilometers. For him, a wind beyond 100 kilometers doesn't make any sense. But then if there is wind, even in deep seas, even for the north of the state of Kerala, which is say about even 200 or 300 meters, there could be a fishing restriction. So that affects their livelihood. So that's the kind of precision fishers need, which they do not get. So even with the best of forecast, fishers prefer to take risk because they need fish. If there is no fish, the women end up selling dried fish or salted fish, as you see here. So that's not very remunerative, but then they can go by that. So there is a pressure to fish always, no matter what the weather is. So we acknowledge that several factors can impede effective forecast. There is issues in scale of forecast in time and space. There is timeliness of forecast when they get the forecast, and dynamics of weather changes, which forecasts do not always reflect. So what fishers do is they have some sort of jungle telegraph. They share information while in the sea through their wireless sets and mobile phones. Okay, it's happening 30 kilometers away. There is a wind system coming. So move away, move out of its way. So that happens informally without any intervention from the Coast Guard or coastal police or the weather forecasters. So beyond that, beyond the technicalities and limits of forecast and forecast skills, there is also issue of not understanding how poor some of the fishers are and how their lived lives and human experience determine the modes of fishing. So we are now sharing these lessons with fishers, forecasters, and academics. There are some positive responses because the forecasters are now sharing storm tracks that are happening, storm tracks of storms happening far away and maybe going one direction. So fishers who go to that region of the sea can be prepared. Okay, listen, there is something going to happen there. Maybe in 2 days, we should not go there. Or at the same day, we should not go too far away. So that kind of evolution is happening. So we aid this through some interventions. We have this co-production. We have a website called Radio Monsoon and Wind and Waves, which we could probably, if there's a question, we could discuss more. So we basically give the regional North Indian Ocean weather patterns of the Arabian Sea, close to Kerala and Lakshadweep, the offshore islands. And we also share daily weather forecasts for the southernmost 3 districts of India. So that's all about it. We still have no answers to figure out how lived lives and practical indigenous knowledge can be incorporated into weather forecast, but that's probably new avenues of learning for us. Thank you. And this is coastal football, which is very famous. And so, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Max.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will come back for questions, but let's move on now to Alex, please. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the role that object-centric explorations can play in supporting community engagement and well-being? And I understand you've got examples from India, but also some populations in the UK. But talk to us a little bit about the role of objects.
Great, thank you so much, Hazel, and thank you so much to everyone. It's wonderful to be here today, and just hearing some of those things that you're working on at the moment is really inspirational, so thank you. As Hazel said, I very much come at things kind of from an object-centric perspective, so I'm really interested in materiality and in how communities and different people engage with things, and engage in emotional ways and very kind of embodied ways. So I couldn't do a session without some objects, but it's really, really hard when it's digital. So you can see this, I don't know if you can see a little shell there. And then I've got another object here, which is an artist-made, very strange object. And the reason I'm showing objects is goes back to something that I heard at a session earlier today, which was thinking about different epistemologies and thinking about how different people share what knowledge is and how they know different things. And I think certainly in this country, we devalue the knowledge that we get from objects and from the material. So it's something that I try to bring to the fore in my work as a museum professional, but also now as a university researcher. So I'm really interested in the role that objects can play in well-being, but in really specific and kind of micro level ways. So not necessarily on massive community scales like a lot of you have been talking about today, but much more a focus on care for individuals, for communities, for workers, and I guess it kind of goes to the really macro, the whole planet, and focusing on the climate crisis. So I'm particularly interested in co-production and the ways in which objects are levelers in some ways. So they enable, if you take an object to a discussion with any type of group of people, and you can talk about an object. You can say what it reminds you of, how it makes you feel, what it feels like to touch it. You can bring in memories of objects. You can talk about your family's histories. You can talk about experiences. So you can use objects as starting points and ways in to almost anything, whether it's a school group coming in to learn something about history or about geography, or whether you want to flip that and actually use objects as ways in to talk about really difficult, traumatic issues with particular communities who've been affected by disaster. Everyone can start with an object, and by careful facilitation, it's the way that you kind of introduce different questions and get people talking that can really help share knowledge, share expertise, and things like enabling co-produced exhibitions, co-produced stories about people's experiences of disaster. All of those sorts of things are projects that I've worked on in museums, particularly for many years. I think it's really important to enable grassroots organisations to share the agency that they have. And I think, again, objects are a really great way of doing that. Particularly at the moment in this country, in the UK, with the COVID pandemic crisis, we've obviously seen a massive amount of trauma, people who've lost their loved ones, people who are really ill with long COVID. We've got people whose livelihoods have been damaged, who've lost their homes, people who are really suffering with mental health issues, as well as everything else. And I think there are, obviously we're in a completely different context here, but I think there are lots of those sorts of things that can be drawn on in similar issues around the world. Particularly, I think ideas around loneliness are really important, and almost using objects as a way in to alleviate some of that loneliness might be an interesting opportunity. I've worked on a couple of projects in different parts of India which have been object focused. They weren't necessarily about recovery, but one of them was with the National Museum Institute in Delhi, and it was called Things Unbound, What Do Objects Do? And I think that question of what do objects do and what they can do is a really important one when thinking about recovery. And also I've been involved in looking at that question in Ladakh as well, where there are some really massive environmental challenges, not least. But also what emerged there is the importance of making and the importance of understanding making objects and kind of those traditional ways of understanding things that may be lost because of the massive impacts of tourism and so on. So I'm sort of, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess object-centric work is really, can play a really, really important part. And just some examples of practice in the UK, where museums have been really responding to the COVID crisis. Obviously, overnight, there were closures to museums, there were people put on furlough, there were redundancies, all of the community engagement programs pretty much stopped. And there was a massive crisis because museums often do really amazing activist, socially just work around social justice. And suddenly, what do they do with those vulnerable communities? So particularly focusing on issues for support for older people. How can we help older people not be lonely during COVID? What about mental health for young people and so on, when there's no physical access to our spaces? So there are some museums went full on, and there's an amazing museum called the Museum of Homelessness, which basically turned itself into a food bank and distributed food across its communities around London. The Climate Museum UK have done some amazing work in similar really activist ways. There have also been lots of projects. The Migration Museum works with refugees and asylum seekers. And again, there's been a lot of very, very practical help given rather than kind of focusing particularly on collections, because that's not the most important thing right now. Using online sources has been really important as well. And just things like some museums have done things like a weekly sharing conversations over coffee, sharing recipes and getting people to do things alongside. And obviously it's completely, this is a very, very different context that we're talking about here. But I think that some of those examples might have resonance elsewhere, and particularly when thinking about well-being, mental health, loneliness and crisis, and the joy of connecting with people over objects. I think that's where I'm going to end. But thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, objects as you say, as starting points for eliciting stories, voices, to remember. But anyways, I won't say anything else. Let's move on. Mary, thank you so much for being here. Could you give us an example from your work as Director of Programs at Timbuktu, illustrating how disaster affected communities can be supported in self-driven recovery processes.
Thank you, Hazel. And I'm trying to type. Nice listening to everybody, and it's wonderful to be here with you. Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to present some slides and go a little fast because it is, I'm just trying to present our work, 30 years work. I'm going to present it in 5 to 7 minutes. Next one. Okay. So we are from, after listening to the stories from the flood affected areas, mountainous areas, I'm talking about a drought affected area. And we are from Ananthapuram district of Andhra Pradesh, South India, which is quite though once part of the great Vijayanagara kingdom, it is now quite impoverished and drought affected. Yeah, so this is the landscape of the place in summer, which is quite barren. And coming to the story of Timbuktu. So Timbuktu is this place some of us development activists did an experiment in regenerating barren land into green area. So this is the land we named Timbuktu. Okay, so this is the same place in 1995. We did a lot of experiments in that area, and the same place in 2010. And the floral species are really gone up from 21 to about 400. So subsequently, we started the NGO called Timbuktu Collective, and which we started very small in about 10 villages, but now we work in 186 villages with about 31,422 families. And these are the most vulnerable sections of people in the area. So we have basically been looking at who are the most vulnerable sections of people. And we have developed 8 thematic areas in our work. And the most important strategy we have taken up is promoting cooperatives, like form village level groups of these people and federate them as cooperatives. So today the net worth of these cooperatives is 42.65 crores. In million, it is 426 million. And one important initiative is promoting organic farming and marketing of the organic produce. Smallholder farmers, and there are about 2,000 families, and we basically focus on the traditional crops and organically cultivated, and the procurement, processing, and marketing of this. I'm sorry, some small issues. So in the farmer cooperative, one important point is that 52% of the MRP goes back to the farmers. And we work with the agricultural laborers who own small ruminants, that is sheep mostly. So this, under this initiative, we provide ethno-vet services to these people, and they do an enterprise. They have a mutton pickle enterprise as well. And this is the work of inspired by Timbuktu, regeneration of wasteland. It's a community conserved area that we have worked on. Anyway, so I'm sorry, there is some issue with the slides.
Okay.
Okay, this is the community. Sorry.
Sorry, Mary. There was some issue. Actually, we were accidentally sharing it. I wasn't aware that we weren't aware that you were also sharing it. Sorry. We'll let you share if that's okay.
Yeah, I would share.
Sorry, that was, yes, please do. Sorry.
I have deleted some slides. That is why.
Oh, okay. Sure. Go.
Should new share.
They need to do us as a host.
No, ikkada undi kada, you are screen sharing ani. New share pedama. Try new share.
Perhaps if it's a problem, because I'm afraid that we might run out of time and not be able to hear anything. Are you able to talk to us without your slides, or just? And we actually, maybe it's a good moment for Ladyfingers, who's been doing the wonderful graphics throughout the sessions. Rajasi, I don't know if you'd like to share that, and Mary. So I'm sorry, but these technical issues happen sometimes. But we'd love to hear more about the cooperatives and the organic farming and traditional crops that you were telling us about. Oh, is this?
I'm just checking if it is coming.
Are you able to continue?
So I think this is the right. Okay, so I'll just talk about, so basically we have been in this area for 30 years now, and we have been working with the most vulnerable sections of people, and especially women, children, people with disabilities, smallholder farmers, landless labor, these sections of people. And especially you asked about our work with women, and we have, it's okay. So we have promoted like 4 cooperatives of women with about 25,000 members. It's independent cooperatives. And these cooperatives, these are actually our flagship program, and quite connected with, disasters and, like even for the pandemic time, really able to partner with them, and, because they were already doing, as part of their work, like while running a successful finance institution, like making them members, helping them to save and access credit, and also helping the women to access their rights. They are quite in touch with in their villages, like about 200 villages, who are the really poorest of the poor. And they also take up welfare activities, and they help in calamities and situations like that. So even at this COVID pandemic time, when like 2020, the first thing was like, what do we do? And the women's cooperatives were able to immediately assess in all the 200 villages who are worst affected, like single women, migrant labor who have come back to the villages, and people who have been stuck in the area, migrant labor from other part of the country, things like that. And then we designed a program, like we started supply of food for these families. And we have supported so far some 5,400 or so families, combining last year and this year. And at this time, when this food was being provided, we sourced the food supply from the farmers. And the farmer cooperative was quite, locked down, and people were not able to travel. So we were able to source all the, the relief material from the farmers very fast. And also another important point was the cooperative with people with disabilities. So they were also like very immediately able to check among them their membership. They had 1,550 members who are the most affected. So it was like a very dynamic action was possible because of the presence of the cooperatives and the people's organizations, people's leadership in place. So I just wanted to talk about, having been settled here for last 30 years and having worked with the people and promoted these organizations and cooperatives. And there is, to some extent, we feel satisfaction that we were able to act on some of these issues, especially of the most vulnerable people. Now we also work with the government, especially this year in COVID, whatever relief activities, and also working through the government on vaccination, setting up isolation centers. And we still continue our food supply program. And we also, continuously we engage with the cooperatives to work out different strategies. So I'm sorry I could not show the presentation. And
we understand.
Yeah.
But perhaps that can be on the website. I mean, if you could share it anyway. But thank you so much, Mary. I mean, that's a fascinating story of how you've been able to bring together different groups to mutually support each other at this time in particular. Thank you so much. We'll have to move quickly on to our final speaker now. Shalini, if you could, I don't know if you're on mute, if you could unmute yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about your own research and work, giving us an example of how... am I audible? Yes, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
So there's a screen already active, so yes. How do I share the screen? Okay, great.
Would you like...
just let me see. Sorry. Okay, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to be presenting this work on Remember Bhopal Museum. This is a survivors movement media project and memory project, which establishes memory as a critical component of resilience, recovery, and justice processes. What happened in Bhopal is very well documented, so I'm not going to go into the technical details of the disaster. We know the context of how the disaster happened in 1984 through the involvement of American multinational giants. Starting from 1969, the disaster happened in 1984. In between 1969 and 1984, there were multiple leaks. But in 1984, it was a mega disaster that happened, killing thousands of people within first few hours of the methyl isocyanate leak. And ever since then, the corporation, the American multinational giant that was involved in this disaster has gone through 2 new corporate avatars through the merger with Dow Chemicals in 2001 and with the merger with DuPont in 2007. So just to give you a location of Bhopal, which is, the capital city of Madhya Pradesh, the central state in India, which is also the agricultural hub. And that is the reason why Bhopal was chosen by the, as a sort of an experimental site for green revolution and agricultural modernization, relying on foreign technologies and science uncritically, so to speak. So Bhopal happened on 2nd, 3rd December midnight, and as I mentioned, killed thousands and thousands of people. Till date, we are still counting the numbers, but it is estimated that more than 25,000 people have died because of the gas impacts, and nearly 2 lakhs, I think, by now are chronically ill. And there are also new forms of disasters and diseases that were never sort of estimated or anticipated at the time of the disaster, are now known to us as researchers and as activists involved with the community. But ever since then, the Bhopal struggle has also been a struggle about keeping the memory of continuing injustices alive, given that this is almost like a David and Goliath story, where the poorest of the poor and urban poor impacted by the gas and water contamination are fighting some of the biggest powerful corporations of the world and have no support from the government, which remains apathetic to their own cause. So I joined Bhopal movement as a fresh graduate of social work from Delhi University. Soon after my post-graduation, I started working with the movement. And with 3.5 years of work with, deeply embedded engagement as a full-time campaigner with the movement, I started thinking more and more critically about the media work of the movement itself. How does a movement which challenges a corporate, basically the corporate capitalism, is able to survive in a context where media is becoming more and more corporatized and corporate control? So that was my entry point into my PhD. But during my PhD itself, I became involved with setting up of the Remember Bhopal Museum because of the political necessity that was experienced by the movement in 2011 during my fieldwork year. So through my PhD and my previous research, but also as an experience as an activist, we were very aware of the kind of representation of the disaster by the various actors. So I'm going to give you in a very brief gist about it. So for instance, if you look at the response to disaster, trauma and loss, what is the corporate response, whether it is Carbide or Dow or now Dow DuPont, the disaster itself has been treated as an accident, as an outcome of a sabotage by a factory worker, or it is seen as something which is containable, manageable. It is an isolated event with no precedence before or after 1984 gas leak. So the approach of the corporations have been to avoid liability and distancing from the event using all means and medium, including active dilution and active manipulation of the data and information, but also collusion and arm twisting of Indian state. The corporations look at healing as a post-disaster process and see government as primary agent of this process, and they remain suspicious and wary of survivors. In fact, they have launched snooping mechanisms, snooping campaigns on the activists, and also defamation attacks. What has been the government response? Not very surprising. It has followed the corporate line and also positions disaster as an unprecedented, isolated, sudden event. The approach ever since the MIC leak in 1984 has been that of face saving, firefighting the disaster, basically denial of crucial issues, abortion of crucial research midway, data fuzzing. So on one hand, the government blames corporation for the disaster, and on the other hand, it also colludes actively with it for creating an investment-friendly environment in India. Government sees healing or justice as post-disaster processes, which it sees that these are processes that are best delivered through a string of institutions and bureaucracies run by experts and elites, not necessarily coming from survivors community who have the actual direct experience of the disaster. So instead, what government sees is it sees itself as a primary custodian of survivors, and this mentality of situating itself as a stewards does not restrict or limit only to legal corridors or medical corridors, which are established conventional routes of recovery and justice, but it also now extends to memorialization of the disaster, where the government positions developing a memorial project by transforming. So basically, it sees memorialization as a process of social catharsis. but it's thinking into the what should be the memorial like and where should the memorial be is very sort of dicey, because the government now is very aggressively pursuing converting the toxic carbide factory. So it is an unsafe zone, converting it into a safe zone in the name of memorialization, bypassing toxic waste remediation, bypassing groundwater contamination, bypassing survivors and their agency, and bypassing the Survivors Museum, which already exists in Bhopal city. It seeks to do so by involving new middle class actors who have themselves not experienced the disaster or has had no experience with either the remediation process or with the justice movement as such. The struggle of memory and perception of the disaster has been, constant because of the reasons that there are multiple disasters in Bhopal which are building on each other, creating cascading, compounding vulnerabilities. Each of these issues is extremely technical, complex, because it is unfolding over last 36, 37 years, which also creates a condition, a sense of media fatigue, where media, which essentially responds to events, reports on events, but does not engages with processes, fails to report on why this injustice remains a sort of, a constant condition in Bhopal. Because on almost everything else that it wants to report on, the government has failed to deliver. So media also gets, stuck in these issues. But the most limiting and most dangerous factor is the ongoing state-corporate nexus, which in the context of uncertain risk, unconfirmed recovery practices, which my colleague yesterday spoke about, Rachna Dhingra, on how the the medical practice has been completely just a firefighting approach, and the cascading disaster still continues. This nexus has controlled all routes to healing and justice through various, including the ways of memory and perception. So whether you see it at the carbide factory, which is on the top left, you can see, so whether these are the material realities of the carbide factory, that it remains, contaminated site, or whether it is a material reality of the water contamination issue and the communities that are now living with contamination impacts, not just as first generation impacted, but now also as second and third generation impacted. So doing nothing to deliver justice by actively doing something about the material realities, which are the conditions which are creating conditions of oppression and damages to the community. What the government chooses to do is to engage with the symbolic, ritualistic remembrance process in order to basically, a lazy remembrance, do nothing to actually change the condition of survivors, but to just talk about it in a different manner, which also ultimately will help reinforce the violence in a new way. How will that happen, and what has the survivors done? The survivors movement has basically learned from government and corporate behavior, and wherever the government has failed, the survivors movement has stepped in to fill those gaps through research, healing, and justice. So it is a multi-pronged effort in terms of connecting recovery and justice processes, but also connecting them through the vial of memory. This is happening in terms of, you see, the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, a series of organizations, each of which has their own specific constituencies, specific issues, which are otherwise, sort of remain peripheral to state government and legal justice processes. Yesterday you have already, I think, heard about Sambhavna Clinic and how Sambhavna Clinic is trying to engage into the medical and relief and rehabilitation processes by giving an alternative template to justice. And then the Chingari Center, where I'm sure many of you are already engaged in processes where the children are not really either kept central to the disaster narrative or really seen as people whose knowledge and whose life has dignity and their knowledge is matter. So that is an intervention that Chingari Trust is doing, and it is being set up by two women leaders who have been involved with the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal. But also in terms of what is the role of memory, if not in creating the solidarity links that inspire the movements, that inspire the fight, and that gives communities outside the Bhopal also to continue to fight, these kind of environmental injustice. So henceforth, the award for Chingari. I've spoken about the lazy remembrance, so I'm going to go fast, a little fast now.
I think we have another session starting soon, so please, if you can wrap up in the next minute. Thank you, Shalini.
So yeah, so I mean, the state as a primary custodian of memory is involved in the, the lazy sort of a remembrance, and his idea of memorialization has been linked to disaster tourism, basically converting carbide site into economic renewal, keeping profit over people. But the survivors themselves have, ever since the disaster, have had various kinds of individual, collaborative, and institutional interventions in memory. So whether it is in terms of exhibition, whether it is in terms of the carbide factory wall, which serves as a board, whether it is in terms of a monument that was co-curated by a survivors community alongside a Holocaust survivor, or whether it is first an amateur museum in the name of Yad-e-Hadsa, and then finally what we have built as Remember Bhopal Museum. What was the need and how does it intervene using co-production of knowledges? So first is a theoretical, and I mean basically as a people's museum, the Remember Bhopal Museum is an intervention both in the knowledge hierarchies and representation of the disaster, and at the same time it is an intervention in the post-colonial historiography and how the museums, national museums in India have been designed up till that point of time. So it the ultimate message that Remember Bhopal Museum wants to project, and why it came about, was one, to assert the moral right of memory of survivors, that memory cannot be the ultimate site of betrayal for the survivors. Two, that they are capable thinking agents who are architects of their own resilience. Three, that we are not only demanding a moral right to memory, but we will give you a template in the shape of a people's museum that survivors' voices can actually speak both to emotionality and rationality of disasters. And then finally, developing a critique of corporate capitalism by bringing social movements into a 3D space of museum where the raw energy of people's voices can generate meanings that are otherwise not accessible.
Thank you so much.
I'm just quickly taking you through some pictures. What we have been able to do with this, I can speak about in the discussion later on, but what we have been able to do through the voices of the museum, voices of the survivors into the museum, is things which are not included or have been bypassed in official modes of justice, legal justice, medical justice, relief and rehabilitation justice, have come into the museum fold through these voices. So for example, if you look at the groundwater contamination, or you look at intergenerational impact, these are not the disasters that were ever part of 1989 settlement, which is seen as the ultimate delivery of justice in Bhopal case. But these are realities, and these continue to happen. So with the even though the government still deny this active reality, material reality, but with the museums, I think one city, multiple cascading disaster narrative has been established very well. Bringing the external to the disaster. I'm going to leave you last with a thought on this museum exercise, because the government continues to focus on, although the mayor of Bhopal has called the Remember Bhopal Museum, the People's Museum, as the world-class museum, which he said that he would not let shut down just because of the funding crisis. And yet, we find that the chief minister continues to reiterate the need to convert Union Carbide factory into a memorial site. Just 3-4 days ago, the Bhopal minister reiterated that we need to emphasize the message of people over profit, and hence need to convert Union Carbide factory into a memorial. And this gives us, I think this is a question for all of you as much as it is for Bhopalis and us. Why does Indian state want to convert Carbide factory, a toxic site, into a public memorial for economic renewal in the name of social catharsis, without ensuring toxic waste remediation as per international standards and polluters liabilities, bypassing survivors movement and survivors own museum in the city? So for whom is this work going to be done? To what end? And what is the message that it will convey? Remembrance, forgetting, or that people are disposable, disasters like Bhopal will continue to happen? So I end here. I can take up questions later. Thank you for giving me this time.
Thank you, Shalini. That's a really powerful insight into the complexities of memory and how memorializations can actually traumatize or re-traumatize people. Thank you to all of the speakers. I hope, Mary, we'd love to hear more about the Timbuktu Collective, so we can hopefully put that presentation on our project website so that participants, members of the audience can access it later because of the technical issues during the presentation. Garima, I'm aware that we've run over time and there is another session starting now, so had we better end, or that there is a question, well, two questions here, but I'm not sure if we have time to address them now. Garima, can you just let me know? Well, the questions are, I think for Max, the India Meteorological Department provides forecasts through apps. So it was asking about the additional value of the forecasting system that you spoke about. But very quickly, I do think we have to end. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. India Meteorological Department gives forecast for Kerala. So if there is strong wind approaching anywhere in Kerala, they say that fishermen have to be careful. There is going to be strong wind of 40 kilometers an hour. Sometimes on the basis of such strong wind warnings, they restrict fishing also. So the point is that that's not relevant for a fisherman in Thiruvananthapuram at the extreme south of Kerala who goes to fish within a radius of 10 kilometers. So our value addition is in localizing this forecast using the data from India Meteorological Department, making graphics relevant for that day, for the coming 3 days, on a larger scale, where the wind is coming from, where exactly is this 45 kilometer wind happening, and also giving a projection of the entire region of the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, looking at a week-long trend, so that we know that next week this wind might come here, there could be stronger, so that fisher can prepare. So we are basically reducing the scope to in time and space, at the same time giving the big picture to the fishers. That's the value addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we see Rajashi's summary image, please? Because I think that will summarize far better the content of this session than I can put into words in just a minute. So thank you so much for this wonderful visual summary of the discussions. So we've seen so many diverse examples of ways in which self-driven recovery can be supported in various contexts, including Puerto Rico, India, and even a mention of the UK. So I think we really need to end here because we have our final session starting. This summary image will also be on the project website. So all that remains is for me to thank all of the speakers for your wonderful contributions, and everyone for listening. And I just wish we had more time, but it's our final session about to begin, and I really can't eat into that. So thank you so much, everyone.